So Ruby, the first thing I'm noticing on your essay is that your outline is blank, or at least somewhat blank, and what that probably is saying to me is that I'm gonna guess that you used cut paste instead of copy paste. Um, but do keep in mind that part of your grade on this is going to be having a completed outline. So even though it might sound kind of like a pain right now, you might want to think about copying and pasting from your essay to your outline again, just to make sure you don't lose those points, because that's the only way I can prove that people were doing their classwork when they were supposed to be. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to read your essay now. Situational irony is when you expect something to happen in the story, but it turns out to be something else, usually the opposite of what the reader was expecting. Right. Can we just kind of say, but, you know, hang on. But instead, the opposite happens? In the story Interlopers, written by Saki, well, first of all, it's called The Interlopers. You want to make sure you get the title complete. It includes a lot of situational irony. For example, in the story it talks about two people who were in a very long family dispute become trapped under a tree. After a while they compromise and become friends. As they work together to call for help, they end up summoning wolves, so in the end no one will ever know that they finally become friends. The expectation is in the story is that their cooperation will lead to their survival, but in the end the reality is that the men's cooperation leads to their death. Good, so I see that you have a very complete understanding of the story, which is great. One thing I think we could simplify. We could say just delete this section. We could say the Interlopers by Saki. Here, why don't we do this? The Interlopers, written by Saki, is about two people who were in a long family dispute. And then you can kind of say, so make that a period, and then you can kind of say, after nearly killing one another, right, because that's true, they become trapped under a tree, and after a while they compromise and become friends. Good. As they work together to call up here. This part right here is that's the ironic moment that's going to be in your thesis statement. It's going to be talked about in your body paragraph. We really don't need it to be stated in this paragraph as well. So I would just delete it. I would say the Interlopers is a good example of situational irony because, and then say, you know, what does the reader expect and what does the reader get instead? And that can be kind of like, you can revise your thesis just a little bit just to make it a little more clear and a little less wordy. Near the end of the story of Interlopers, situational irony occurs when the two men who become friends after a family dispute get stuck under a tree. Right. They work together to call for help. However, instead of them finding help from their recruits like the reader expects to happen, they are attacked by wolves. Right. Why don't we rephrase this? Why don't we say situational irony occurs near the end of the Interlopers, right? So we'll change the beginning of this. Situational irony occurs near the end of the story. I would just say near the end of the Interlopers, and have a period there. And then when two men who become friends after a family dispute get stuck under a tree, why don't, because we've already mentioned them, so we don't need to state them like we haven't heard of them before. So why don't we just do when the two have we used their names yet? Because honestly, it might be easier if you could find a way to work their names into your summary and your intro. Then down here you can just say when Ulrich and George become stuck under a tree, they resolve their differences and work together to call for help, right? And then again, you don't want to give away the wolves part that yet. because that is going to be coming later when you give your quote and your explanation. So get rid of the mention of the wolves beforehand. Who are they? Asked George, straining his eyes to see what the other would gladly not have seen. Wolves. Since this is such a short quote, I would keep this. I would put this in this paragraph, even though technically speaking, you're probably right. We probably should separate them, just for the look of it. I would put this in the previous paragraph. Now, before you give a quote, though, you always need some kind of pre-quote transition, like according to the text or something like that. So when the reader expects that they will start calling for help, people will come. So when the reader expects that when they start calling for help, people will come. So there's something a little confusing about that. So when the reader expects that when they start calling for help, I would say scrap that. The reader expects that when they start calling for help, people will come. However, this contradicts the expectation, and they are attacked. Why don't we say the outcome, it contradicts the expectation, and they are attacked by wolves. And then maybe it might be nice to say instead, just to, whoops, not there, there. The interlopers expresses situational irony many times in the story, all reinforcing the theme, which is to not let simple disputes blind you from danger. I'm not so sure I agree with that it happens many times. As far as I know, it only happens that one time. So you may want to change that. Someone could use this theme in a real-life situation. They would know not to waste all their energy on a simple dispute in a dangerous situation. Right. So that is very repetitious of what the theme actually is. So you want to try and steer clear of that. You want to try and explain it in some different terms, right? This is sort of a story about keeping your problems in perspective. You know what I mean? Because if they had had the perspective to know that this neighbor feud is not such a big deal, they would have never ended up in the woods in the first place. And so maybe something you could say is someone could use this theme in real life by keeping their problems in perspective so they don't end up meeting an unfortunate fate the way that George and Ulrich did. And that would be just as good a way to explain it. Alright, Ruby, you have plenty of comments from me. Please make sure that you address all of them, not just the ones that I wrote down, but there are many that I just spoke and didn't write down. So you may need to watch this video once or twice more just to make sure that you catch everything. Once again, please make sure you revise according to the comments. If you have any questions, of course, I'm willing to come out and explain anything to you. Thank you so much for your effort on this, and I look forward to reading the final copy.